Are we in a video game crash? Right, okay, so let's be honest. The majority of news coming out about gaming at the moment has been like a constant spiral of doom and gloom and misery. And it's just constant. And at present, gaming history is literally unfolding before our very eyes. We are living through something that people in 10, 20, 30 years are going to talk about. Very much like we all talk about the video crash of 1983. And it's a very negative portion of history at the moment. So I wanted to discuss with you basically how the gaming industry has ended up in such a mess this time round, and whether we're already in a crash or whether we are literally charging towards one. And I feel like the obvious place to start with this is back in 2020 in the pandemic. During the pandemic, gaming was literally the saviour of people in lockdown. Everyone's stuck in their homes, they're furloughed from work, they've got nothing to do, and gaming was just doing really, really well. A lot of people needed it to escape the drudgery of being locked in their houses. There was only three choices: social media or TV. Well, you couldn't watch sports anymore because no one was allowed to even play sports in the first place, let alone get to watch it on TV. Therefore, gaming was pretty much one of the only options for many people. And the gaming industry, as a result of that, was absolutely booming, and to an extent they saw themselves as pandemic proof, as in like the whole world was burning down around them, yet they were growing and growing. It was like nothing could stop them. Through this period, did the gaming industry gain a false sense of security? Well, one thing is for sure. According to the news, the gaming industry is constantly complaining about not making enough money, considering the vast amount of cost that they're putting into everything, with how many hundreds of millions this cost and how many hundreds of millions that cost. Well, of course, they're probably not going to be making the money back on it. But this has seen various companies, as a result of that, laying off thousands and thousands of members of staff to basically try to meet shareholder promises. Multiple expensive AAA games aren't hitting the sales figures expected or needed, essentially. And games like Suicide Squad and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are like prime examples of this. I'm not even going to go into like the details about each of those. I've made a video about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Square Enix only last week. So if you want to know a bit more depthy information on that, go find that now, or at the end of this video. Others are using the excuse that basically the rising cost of game development is making predatory microtransactions an essential part of gaming's future for it to be sustainable. An example of this would be Tekken 8 stealth dropping paywalled features only after receiving glittering, sparkling reviews, which has caused a huge amount of distrust in their player base. Square Enix released their notification of extraordinary losses, which is absolutely mental. Again, as I said, I've done a video on it. Xbox has just the other day basically closed a load of subsidiaries for Bethesda, which was horrendous considering some of those have released games which are absolute bangers. And then Warner Brothers have announced that they're going to only focus on key franchises such as Mortal Kombat and Harry Potter going forward, and even those are going to an extent, get bastardized into service games apparently. The general call to action, it seems, from the execs is that they want to make more mobile games. They want to make a whole load of service games with millions of microtransactions so that they can have a constant feed of money coming in off of the general consumer. And they essentially want to put less and less emphasis on traditional one-player games, which you basically pay for once. They want you to buy their games and then own nothing and then continue to feed them and then be happy with that. So let me ask you, bear in mind that most of these decisions that are being made are not actually in the interest of the gamers who are going to be buying and playing these games, but rather only in the short-term interest of shareholders. How is making products that we don't want and gamers don't want going to fix anything? I've come up with two different perspectives as to how this can both have a positive effect and a negative effect, but will ultimately end up sending gaming into a doom spiral. Okay, so the positive consequence. Short-term financial stability. Prioritizing shareholder interests through strategies such as implementing microtransactions and developing mobile and service-based games can provide short-term financial boost. This approach may help stabilize companies financially by tapping into consistent revenue streams, thus allowing them to survive market fluctuations and maintain operational capabilities. This financial stability could potentially enable companies to invest in new technologies and innovative projects in the future. This is what they want, but it doesn't mean that this is what they're going to get. And then the negative consequences. Long-term consumer distrust. Making products that prioritise profit over player satisfaction can lead to consumer distrust and resentment. Gamers might feel their loyalty and investments are undervalued if they perceive that their interests are consistently secondary to corporate profits. This growing dissatisfaction could lead to a decline in brand loyalty, reduced engagement, and ultimately a decrease in the customer base. Over time, this might erode the company's reputation and financial performance, leading to a negative spiral affecting future profitability and viability. We have to be honest though, I think we're already at this stage. So what can we learn from all of this? Basically, the overconfidence generated in the game industry from the record pandemic profits is completely unfounded and ridiculous, because of course people weren't going to continue gaming to the very same level as soon as they were allowed back outside again, because people were allowed to go out and watch or play sports, they could visit family and friends, they were finally allowed to, go on holiday abroad. They were able to even go to restaurants and basically spend time outside touching grass again after a year of not being allowed to. And then also something else to consider is that people in America, their stimulus checks won't have lasted all that long. So they wouldn't have been able to sit there and pay for more games. They would have probably wanted to go out and actually spend their money on something a bit more meaningful than being stuck indoors. So gaming, once again, at that point, would have ended up as a smaller part of life again, like it was prior to the pandemic. But then there's even more to it than that, because essentially the new normal is not normal. I don't really know how else to explain it, but life is different now than it ever was before the pandemic happened. I mean, for one thing, away from gaming, the greater world is struggling to bounce back after all of these lockdowns. A massive, really obvious example of this is Putin. He exploited the world whilst it was weak and used that as almost like a perfect opportunity to invade the Ukraine. This has ended up leading to the oil and gas crisis that has been felt all over the world, regardless of which countries have their own reserves or not. And the general consumer is more or less a bit poorer than they were prior to the pandemic, and they've got other priorities to spend their money on rather than just trivial stuff like games. So maybe, just maybe, we can't fully blame the gaming industry for their short-sightedness in these unprecedented times. Except we can! We absolutely can! I think that the gaming industry did know that this would happen, but they needed investor confidence. That's it. They needed money to be able to continue doing what they were doing. But history shows us that pandemics are usually 1/3 of a dark triad, with the other parts of the triad being economic downturns and wars. So when you take into consideration that this is actually the 4th time in recorded history that this has very prominently happened, before the video game industry was falling, the Roman Empire fell. The Roman Empire, and bear with me, stick with me on this. This isn't a reach. I've got facts to back this up. Number 1, the Antonine Plague and the Marcomannic Wars, 165 to 180 AD. The pandemic was the Antonine Plague, which was possibly smallpox or measles. It struck the Roman Empire and killed millions, significantly weakening the Roman population. Then the war, at the same time as that was actually going on, Rome was engaged in the Marcomannic Wars against the Germanic tribes, which stretched the empire's military resources. So, put it this way, the Roman Empire felt a Gothic titties. And then economic impact. The plague and wars together led to labour shortages, decreased agricultural production, so basically starving people, and a strained economy, contributing to the empire's eventual decline. If anyone's wondering why the Roman Empire didn't last longer than it should have. But here we go. Here's an old favourite that everybody all knows about, the Black Death. The Black Death. Has anyone considered what the Black Death might have to do with a possible video game crash in 2024 or 2025? I've considered it, and here we go. The Black Death and the 100 Years' War, 1347 to 1351, during the ongoing War of 1337 and 1453 between Britain and France. So the pandemic at the time was everyone's old favourite, the bubonic plague, the Black Death, which swept through Europe and ended up killing an estimated 1/3 of the population. The war, this period overlapped with the 100 Years' War between England and France, which strained both countries' resources and economies. And the economic impact of this, the pandemic caused massive... I'm not laughing at the horrible suffering, I'm just laughing that I've managed to link this to the gaming crash. The pandemic caused massive labour shortages, leading to economic stagnation and severe social upheavals, compounded by the ongoing costs and disruptions of war. 100 straight years of war indirectly caused, or directly caused, by the Black Death. And then there's a third part. The third one, my third example for this is, I'm not allowed, are we allowed to say this anymore? I don't know. The Spanish flu. You're not allowed to say the Chinese virus, are you? The Spanish flu and World War I, 1918 and 1919. The pandemic was the Spanish flu, which emerged on the final year of the First World War and continued into the post-war period, which is why I said 1919, killing an estimated 50 million people worldwide. When you put that into perspective with COVID-19, that's outrageous. The war itself was obviously the First World War, which on itself was a massive drain on resources and had already weakened the populations of many, many countries, making them more susceptible to disease. And then the economic impact of that was that the combination of the war and the pandemic led to significant economic downturns across the globe, with production slowdowns, labour force reductions, and long-term social and economic disruptions. The long and short of it is that in dark times, opportunists will take advantage of weakness. That's what Putin's done. That's what people are worried the President Xi's going to do with Taiwan. It's just something that happens every single time. That's why I called it a dark triad, because you don't get one without the other without the other. That's literally it. Also, I feel like if I can get all of that information from just doing a quick simple Google search, then I'm pretty sure that the board of directors at all of these massive gaming companies can do the exact same thing. But apparently comforting shareholders and reassuring them about their profits and this wonderful gaming utopia that they have constructed because of the pandemic is so much more important. I mean, after all, with all of this inevitable problems that are going to arise from pandemic and war and economic downturn, of course people are going to prioritise buying a video game over, I don't know, food. To answer my original question, are we in a video game crash? I guess on paper no, but I personally believe that it's certainly imminent. So thank you very much for watching the video. Thank you very much as well if you have stuck around to this point and humoured me with my bonkers theories and ideas. I swear I'm not some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist. But yes, if you enjoyed this video, then subscribe, and if you would really like to support me in a more personal way, then please consider checking out my Patreon. Thank you very much and see you next time.